We're a unique podcast for families of faith. Produced by parents and pastors who understand and appreciate how hard it is to maintain your faith in a hostile culture. We're here to encourage and support you in the most vital role of all, parenting. If you're feeling overwhelmed and afraid, it's okay. You're not alone. Brilliantly Brave is hosted by two honest and engaging dads with 9 kids between them. A road tripper, author, and pastor, Father Brad Matthias, and iShine founder, solo parenting expert, and all-around foodie, Mr. Robert Beeson. Join us each week as we explore and engage with some of the most intriguing, inspiring, outrageous, and awesome parents in the world. This is Brilliantly Brave.
Hi, I'm Pastor Brad Matthias, and I want to welcome you to Season 2 of Brilliantly Brave.
Why did you look at me like that with that pause?
Well, you're the sidekick.
I'm not a sidekick.
Yeah.
I'm a co-host.
Robert Beeson is the one who's speaking, and
I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, he is. He's excited to be here.
Thanks for having me.
And it's a summer that we've endured the heat here in Tennessee. I don't know where you're at, but we're excited now that it's fall, that we're going to be leaving the heat behind, the humidity behind. We're going to find, what, cool air somewhere?
We're going to try, but what you're saying is not accurate. We are going to be broadcasting in the fall, but I'm pretty hot. It's still summer.
Look, we walk by faith,
just
not by sight.
Disclosure.
We walk by faith, not by sight.
Okay.
And if you read your Bible occasionally, you might know that. Okay. So what we have is
this isn't banter. This is more insults than it is banter.
Well, I enjoy it.
Okay. Fair enough. I do too.
So, Pastor Brad here. Robert and I have had a summer off. We've been doing things like tours and festivals. We went to Creation Fest Northeast. Shout out to the guys there. It was an awesome time, and the 40,000 people that were there.
Yes, it was.
Really nice time. We took the Shock and Awe show on the road, and we really, really enjoyed meeting lots of our fans and the people that listen to this podcast. So we're grateful for that. We're also in the middle of producing season 6 of iShine Connect, which is a TV series.
And we're revamping that completely, so we have a different plot line, and it's going to look very different. Very excited about it. It's
going to be on TBN networks as well as Daystar and NRB and any of the really significant Christian television networks in the United States. And so look for that in the January of 2018. That'll become airing, and it'll be on Saturday mornings. So we've been busy. I hope you've had a great summer, and we know that as you get back into the swing of school, as you get back into this sort of schedule of busyness that is life, you're suddenly confronted with a whole series of new stresses as parents. And Robert, you've got 6 kids. Mm-hmm. Mine are in college or married, so I'm in a different season, but I know that for you, this season of life gets crazy busy.
It's wonderful when school starts again. It's the best time of the year because we're finally at a place where there can be some semblance of normal in our home. So I'm looking forward to that day. But yes, it is crazy. I mean, there's a lot of juggling, and we've got all teenagers, 100% teenagers. So it's a very chaotic and dramatic existence right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And in particular, today's guest is going to be helpful to the parents who are beginning to deal with the pressures of school. And if your kids go to public school, if they're in any way being affected by the culture, which this podcast, Brilliantly Brave, is very concerned about the impact our culture is having on our youth. This podcast is for you because we're going to be looking at creation. We're going to be looking at the scientific evidence that supports the Bible and ways you as a parent can interact with your child, specifically on the education of science. And our guest today is Thomas Purifoy Jr. Welcome to Brilliantly Brave.
It's great to be here.
Thomas, I've had a chance to look at your film, Is Genesis History, which came out in February of 2017, and it's a fantastic film. Thank you for making it.
Oh, thanks a lot. Really, it was God was very gracious to us. We had some good folks involved. Dr. Del Tack is just incredible. His Truth Project. Mm-hmm. I mean, over 12 million people have seen it, and he went on to Brazil recently. It was translated into Portuguese. It just keeps spreading out. And then the scientists involved and the scholars just great group. So in a way, I was kind of the fly on the wall that got to watch all these guys do their good stuff.
And it set some records, right?
It did. You know, the film was a little bit curious. We had, I think the night it was out, it was the top grossing film in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it's a Thursday. I think it beat the Lego Movie by a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
I like to say it kind of won in the minor leagues. We weren't in the majors.
Well,
it was a one-nighted deal.
Numbers.
It was a big numbers. Yes, a lot of the theaters sold out. I think there are a lot of people. A friend of mine, Tim Challies, who is a blog, very popular blogger, he wrote a review of the film, and he said, you know, I feel like there is a quiet majority of people that have an interest in this, and there has never been a film that really addressed it like this, and so they came out, and it's continued to do well. I think it's still, at least last time I checked, this past few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, it's been on the #1 Amazon DVD as a documentary. So not like Christian stuff, just kind of out there in the middle.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend going and getting a copy of this. I saw it the first night it came out. A friend of mine was an executive producer, but the thing that was like remarkable to me was the stickiness of this. Like, people stuck around. I mean, you're talking anytime you're talking about a documentary that you're diving into some serious facts and listening to scientists and listening to, you know, I'm just going, how long before my head explodes and
right.
You know, I just kind of give up. But there were people actually standing and sitting on the carpeted stairs watching, and younger kids, I wouldn't say like young, but, you know, tweens, and they stuck through the whole thing. I couldn't believe it. They stayed to the end, to the discussion at the table. But
no, it's
really
a funny
well
deal. I mean, we broke a lot of rules with this. When you're not supposed to have a documentary really more than 90 minutes or so, and it was 110, I think. No, 100, not 110, 101 minutes. But with the extra piece, you know, we had a Q&A there. It's another 12:50, so it was a full 2 hours. It's all talking heads. They're all use scientific language. A lot of them. I mean, these are PhDs, so when you say tone it down, that's like going from a 9 to like a 7. So you're still like, you know, the words all, that's what it is, the vocabulary. And we hit a lot of tough, deep, complex topics.
Yeah.
And we put it all together. And I think that's testimony, though, that a lot of people are interested in this.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well done.
Yeah, I had a chance to review it, and, my background is in medical healthcare. And so I've been around a lot of scientific banter, and usually you get, whenever you look at a documentary, whenever you see something that has a scientific sort of core to it, you know, people tune out in about 2 minutes. You know, that's pretty much all they can handle is this, you know, we're really going cerebral when we look at documentaries. And I want to congratulate you. I think this would be very appropriate for a family to watch together, or a church.
Absolutely.
Youth group in particular would really benefit from a documentary like this, because the visuals that you guys use are excellent. The way that you sort of simplify really complex issues. I can tell, as a guy who's been involved in producing a television series, there's a lot of work behind the scenes on that. Tell us about what it was like to be the director, producer, writer of Is Genesis History?
It was a lot of long hikes. So we hiked.
I thought about that when I was watching. Like, someone had to drive up there. There were grips.
We went. Steve Austin. So Steve Austin is This is an interesting story. When Steve, who's the first guy, the geologist that shows up. Steve was actually a child prodigy. Not everyone knows this. He kind of would tell us stories, because you're sitting in the car with somebody a long time. And he got telling stories how he had grew up in Pittsburgh, and apparently there was like a tween show, like he was 10 or something, and he would write in, it's like a science show, and they would put pictures up, it was like an old TV show, so they would show an image of something, and the kids had to write into what it is. And after it went on for like a month or two, the producers wrote his mother, is this kid for real? He'd never, someone giving him this information, and they were like, no, she's like, no, he knows this. So they invited him on the show, and he was on a TV show, kind of like the science kid, when he was a tween. So he started with his love of science, really as a young kid. And of course, I mean, he's one of the first guys getting his PhD in 1979, I think, 78, 79, in University of Pennsylvania, talking about coal. And he introduced the floating log mat theory, this idea. So where do all these these huge coal beds, but they're kind of curious. They have flat bottoms. They have flat tops. They go over continent size. I mean, some of the coal beds we have that are here in the United States stretch all the way, if you kind of can trace them, across Europe and into the Soviet Union. Or the Soviet Union? It was the Soviet Union then when they was writing all this, but yeah, in Russia. What makes really, really big, huge things like that? Well, his idea was a global flood. So he came with this idea of a floating log mat. So if you get a flood, where do all the trees go? Well, they float. And what kind of trees are they? And so anyway, not to get too down into that, we talked about rabbit holes. That's a great example. And then one of the other PhDs laughs that he was the luckiest PhD ever. he had this idea of a floating log mat in 79 and 1980 Mount
So
St.
floating log,
Helens.
just to stop you for a second, that's basically like when you see a flood, you get all the wood floating down basically in one layer. That's
His idea was, so all this was, billions and billions of trees. So what would happen? They would get on the surface, they would roll, the bark would all scrape off, and it would float down and create peat, because that's what we see in coal. Coal is mainly bark and wood, and it takes 12 feet of wood product to make a foot of coal. That's a lot. So let's just think about hundreds of feet of coal in places. So what makes that? Well, then Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and sure enough, Spirit Lake went up 800 feet, took out all the trees around it. And you can go see pictures. Million trees floating in Spirit Lake. Like, we actually filmed it up there. What in the film? We went to Mount St. Helens, Steve was with us. So 4 years later, he put on a scuba diving suit and went down, and sure enough, all the bark had come off, and it was already making peat down at the bottom.
Wow.
So this is the thing, is that what you find is that a lot of this data, a lot of this, of really good scientists doing work, has totally been ignored because they view the world from a different paradigm, that biblical paradigm, and so it's just not talked about.
I imagine in the process of filming this, it must have been hard to qualify, okay, we want to cover this, we want to keep this in, because just as soon as you open up one layer, you're like, oh, but that also leads to this, and
that's right.
And you could very easily spend a few hours just on one particular topic. It'd be hard from a creative perspective to kind of keep reining it in to focus. But
well, I think that's one of the challenges with this topic that everyone faces. My mom's going to face this when they've got a kid or a parent. Is going to be like, okay, there's so much to know. How do I deal with this? And I think we have to realize that it's been 200 years for another paradigm has developed itself trying to interpret the data. And so you've got tens of thousands of scientists who've bought into this view, and they're then taking the data and doing their best they can to interpret it. Now, there's still some shockingly, to think that after all that time has gone on, there's still some shockingly big problems, not the least of which is what's the mechanism for, evolution. I mean, most people aren't aware that there's no real defined mechanism for how, natural selection's one idea, but when you start digging into these on both sides, you're like, wait, a lot of folks don't know a lot about any of this stuff. So I think that the sheer size of it is what is very daunting to people. And then knowing, how do I as a parent approach this? How do I teach this? In a similar way, that's the way we were with this film. And I think that's when we looked at it, we kind of, the film's divided into three areas, and it starts out very simply dealing with just this idea of catastrophe. Things happen in the world that happen quickly, and it doesn't have to take a long time to make what we see around us. And it kind of rolled out from there.
As a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask, and that is, so you're a father, you've got young kids. Where do you start? Where does a parent out there start talking about creation or the evidence of our faith related to creation? Where do you suggest?
It's funny. I don't know if you may not know this. This film actually was started with a conversation with a tween. So my daughter Libby,
interesting,
who's out there in the other room now, 14? She was 10, and she saw the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. And Libby's very smart, very, very sharp. And the first time she had really been introduced to evolutionary thinking with Bill Nye. And a lot of that is she just hadn't thought about. And started with really conversation. So I think that's a good place. Where do you start? Start talking about stuff. And what she had done is she'd been taught the Bible really well, and she quickly began to realize that any picture of an old Earth, a picture of evolution, meaning the idea that we had a common descent, a common ancestor that we all were descended from, related, originally, we're primates, but going back, if you go back, you're back to bacteria. It's just a single tree of life. All these things, I think she quickly realized, even at 10 years old, that this is a different history. It's a different story than it's in the Bible. The issue is not science. The issue is history. Science wants to impinge on it, and they want to, kind of make it that as an issue, but that's not what the issue, in my opinion, is at all. And she realized that early on, so I felt I needed to understand more about this myself. So I started to study. Really, the film was in a way to answer her questions. And
that's
so,
crazy.
In a sense, some people have said, well, it's a film for adults. I'm like, well, it's really designed for thinking people at all ages, not trying to make it too complex, but also you can't oversimplify. So where do you start? I think you start with questions and starting to ask kids, what are they interested in? Because you don't know. I mean, you can jump in one area that may not care about that. I think that's the first good thing.
That's a good tip. Right.
Yeah, and that really confirms some of the experiences we've had working with the ministry iShine. We've found that tweens, kids between the ages of 7 and 13, are really hungry to be treated like adults. In other words, they like to engage at a higher intellectual level than often we may think.
They can.
Yeah.
They absolutely can.
Yeah, and part of that is it seems to be a direct response to the digital revolution. So they've been exposed to all these ideas. They see and hear really complicated thoughts every day on their smartphones or on the internet. And so it seems that their capacity to wrestle with these difficult questions and wrestle with their faith is not only expanded, but it's voracious. Like they're hungry for that. Have you found that to be true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've taught in a high school and, of course, in middle school for myself for years, and taught junior high and younger, even in elementary kids for years in Sunday school. And what I find is that as you present things as the way they really are and say, look, I think the Bible's a good book, but it's not a book that faith is not a, push the I believe button and take a big leap. It's more like, it's actually a terribly rational thing to think. It's a rational faith, which is very much not the way our society is taught. And so I think that when you present to kids and say, let's just explore this together, let's look into it, the challenge is the parent does need to know some things. And so I think that the two areas that parents have to know really well is the Bible first. That most parents don't realize how much the Bible talks about the first 11 chapters of Genesis. I mean, I would think it was we interviewed a theologian, Doug Kelly, and I was reading an interview where I'm working on some materials right now. So I'm going back reading some of these interviews of these guys. And he said over 150 times, some part of Genesis 1 through 11 is mentioned either by allusion or by direct statement in the New Testament. And then you meet all them comments in the Old Testament as well, is that basically the rest of the Bible looks at those first 11 chapters as foundational. I mean, Martin Lloyd-Jones, the great British pastor, listening again to a series of him on Genesis, and he said, unless Genesis is history, the gospel is not true. I mean, these are directly related. Jesus, if you look at Luke 3, God says, hey, you're my son. He baptized him, and then guess what Luke does? He goes into a genealogy, and he ends up from Jesus all the way to Adam, who's the son of God. And guess what's next? Chapter 4 is the temptation. So, which is the repeat of what Adam did in the garden. Like Jesus is the son of God going in to defeat Satan, whereas Satan defeated the first son of God. It's all about that comparison. And so I think that as parents, you got to know the Bible teaches about these things, and that's your bedrock. And so I think that being able to teach your kids that scripture, because that's what we found my kids. I mean, a funny story. Same daughter, Libby, sitting across the table from a guy I love, a professor of systematic theology. This is a high-level guy who had kind of adopted an old earth view, and he was trying to explain his view of Genesis 1 to us at the table, and I wasn't going to engage him. I really like him. I really respect this guy. I think there are a lot of reasons intellectuals accept these views. Not worth getting into here. But she was very respectful. After we left, she was like, well, what about the context? What about this, and this? What about day? And it means this. And what about, Exodus chapter 20, where it talks about, the fourth commandment. Yeah. Creation of the world in 6 days. And rest in the seventh. That's why you got a week. She knew all these. So I think it's very important that parents teach their kids the Bible and what the Bible teaches, because you can pretty much prove creation in 6 days from Jesus and Paul and Peter. And then if you hold them as an authority, they weren't wrong. So then how did we get to where we are today? That which is the second area, but you got to know the Bible first.
Yeah, that's great. I think the other thing that, like in hearing you talk, that I struggle with personally, that with my kids is having 6 kids, it's questions constantly. Can I do this? What about this? How do I expect? And I get impatient with going, just because. And
right.
As parents, I think it's really important to see questions sometimes. I mean, not like, why can't I have that? Sugar is good, not the stupid question. But they are searching. Our kids are searching. And a lot of times we shut down questions instead of embracing those questions and kind of walking through them and teaching our kids. And so just in hearing you speak, it's a kind of a reminder to myself that I need to be more patient when my kids are exploring things, because that means their mind is searching for an answer for something. And we do have the answer. And so as parents, we need to be pretty deliberate about listening to the questions and walking through those with our kids.
Well, yeah, and I will say this about, though, what I find that kids are, and this is actually kind of funny because we just saw the new Spider-Man. My kids love the Marvel comic series, and so we saw Spider-Man, and we needed to go see Ant-Man because they had not seen that, and so we watched that. And then we went and
just saw that.
Oh, it's one of the best. I mean,
it is so good.
I mean, you got some of the language issues, but it's a funny film. And pretty clean, actually, as films go. And they wanted to rewatch Avengers. The point of it all is that evolutionary theory is the basis of Marvel Comics. There's an article I want to write that evolution really only works great in Marvel Comics. I mean, Ultron, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to evolve himself. And he quotes this stuff, you think. He quotes Peter or upon this, or Jesus, upon this rock I'll build my church. And he plays on all this of evolution. You got to know evolutionary theory to understand Ultron. The point is, all kids, if they are a tween that are watching these movies, they are being drip fed an evolutionary worldview, point by point by point by point. It's not just in schools; it's all around them. So I think that teaching kids to be able even to hear and say, now, where did they get that view? Now, why do they think that? And it's really necessary for the Marvel Cinematic Universe to have evolution. Otherwise, you can't have all these creatures. But, I mean, we don't really think people fly through the air swinging hammers anyway. So it does, certain people don't have certain, abilities, to control the weather. So all that to say, there's a certain reality that's actually, I would argue, evolution really in its ultimate sense is a form of a myth. It's a scientific myth that we've established in order to explain our origins. It's a modern myth. And it sounds crazy to think that. Wow,
no, I think and it's a pretty thin myth. I mean, when you look at it, it takes, we say this all the time, and this is in its simplest form, but it takes more faith to actually believe in evolution than to look at the data that we have and go, okay, there is design here. There is absolute design. And I loved, you were talking just before we went on air here about your friend in England and the design, how that all fits together at the same time is a much more plausible argument than the evolution over millions of years. Would you share that with our?
Yeah, no. My friend is Stuart Burgess. So Dr. Stuart Burgess is at Bristol University. I think he's the head of the engineering department there, and he is a really well-known engineer in Europe, primarily because he works in bio-inspired design. His idea is a Christian and a six-day creationist, and he has basically said, look, I think that the world around me is probably better designed than anything I can do, so I'm going to look to it to get my designs out.
That's amazing.
He's designed things like the solar panels on the Invasat, space station, or not space station, space satellite, the European space satellite. He's worked in redesigning the British bicycling team's bicycle, which is why they won all these medals in this last Olympics. And he actually BBC's on a number of reports. You can go online and see stuff on him on YouTube. He's just this really kind of a mild-mannered guy. But his big point...
So he studies creation.
What he does is he looks at... Oh, yeah, he talks about the dragonfly, about how incredible... Like, they were designing drones. And he said, so how do you... So you've got something that flies incredibly well. Look at a dragonfly. Like, it's tiny, and it flies perfectly, and it can turn on a dime, and you can see all around it. So let's look and see how it flies. He said, when you start studying how a dragonfly actually flies, he said it's crazy complex, the ability for us to try to do this. And he said, so yes, he goes to the creation and looks at the designs in it and says, this is, even in a fallen world, and this is an interesting question, so nothing's ever perfect now, but even in a fallen world, the designs are really effective. So, and he's a six-day creationist, and apparently the head of the university gets letters every now and again saying, this guy's a loon, he's a six-day creationist. And he said he has total job security. The guy just laughs and says, sure, we're not getting rid of this guy. Do you know how good he is for our department? He's an incredibly valuable scientist. And I think that he is a great example. People will say, well, creationists can't be good scientists. Well, they don't even know. They don't even know science. There's so many scientists like Newton, who's a creationist, some of the greatest scientists ever. Maxwell, these were... All the great scientists have believed in God, and many of them are being creationists. Like Newton actually was one of his big deals was how old is the Earth? Now, I say all that to say that there's a lot of ignorance, and I don't mean that word negatively, but just that people just don't know the history that we as Christians have as in science, and that science really grew up in the West because it is us looking at God's world and trying to understand it and trying to explain it because we believed a rational God created a rational world that we as rational people can understand. So with that in mind, what Stuart pointed out is that when you look at six-day creation, when you look at the world as engineered, it actually makes a lot more sense for it to happen quickly because no one evolves things slowly. No engineer slowly starts one system and then slowly starts another. Rather, all the pieces have to be there simultaneously. And a lot of people have talked about this, irreducible complexity just in a simple system as being an intelligent design. I would go so far as to say that the entire world is not just irreducibly complex. It has countless mutualisms. For example, I'm going to probably mispronounce it, mycorrhizal fungi. It's a fungi that lives around roots, that the roots need to take nitrogen out of the soil to bring them in. I think if I'm going to get this right, Kurt Wise explains this. Sometimes I'll mispronounce it because it just gets complex. You can't have one without the other. Each lives on the other, and you have all of these mutual relationships, which of course we know that just from plants. We got to have plants to have, so think if the plants are getting out of the soil, we have to have plants to get oxygen. They need us for carbon dioxide. It goes around and around and around. So throughout our entire body, just the bacteria we have living throughout us helping us stay alive. We can't digest certain things without bacteria. So God has created a world that is so complex. All of the systems are totally interrelated. 6-day creation makes the most sense for that because he would have done it quickly to put it all together.
I love that.
I've been listening raptly. You're obviously very passionate about this and very knowledgeable as well. And I imagine that producing a film like this educated you extensively on some of the details behind the creation question. I know one of our passions is to help parents build filters for their kids. In other words, some type of apparatus that filters out the deceptions and lies of our culture and allows the truth to come through. And it sounds like with the Marvel stuff, you're doing an amazing job of taking pop culture and using it to train and teach your children about the truth of Scripture. The battle, I think, that parents engage with on a daily or weekly basis is how do they know what is not being filtered for their kids? In other words, what are their kids hearing and accepting and believing that the parent never had a chance to refute or to offer an alternative explanation? What I like about this project is that it really goes into this area and opens a door. It's not the end of a process, it's the beginning of a process for a parent. So watching this film together, sitting down as a church, a youth group, watching this opens the door then, I believe, that would be very, very practical and helpful for parents and pastors to begin a dialogue with a tween or a teen. And suddenly, if you've had the experiences I've had with this age group, once you open the right door, it just all piles out. It's like
I think you're right.
There's just a tremendous amount of backlog, things that they've been sort of sitting in church for months or weeks or years, and they're going, this isn't quite what I'm hearing, and I'm not sure what to do with this. And so my encouragement as a pastor is this. I look at this as a catalyst. This is a prompting, if you will, of a larger discussion of faith with kids, with young adults, and even older adults who maybe are attending a church or engaged in their faith in a way that this has always been unsettling to them.
Well, I think you're right. And the challenge we faced with this, it goes back to your first comment, Robert, about the complexity of just putting what to put in here. This is a simplification, and it's really the tip of the iceberg. Unlike a lot of different topics where you can watch a film and then kind of go back and rediscuss, the questions of faith, the question of that. Each one of these is a different doorway down a different rabbit hole. So the problem, it's just the reality of it. Each one of these 5-10 minute interviews represents 4 to 5 hours of material, of which that's really was the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Meaning, what I find is that there is such a lack of knowledge about the world around us, not just among Christians, about everyone, that what I found was that a lot of the material that people approach us as Christians is anti-evolutionary. Well, if we just show them why this can't be right, that's not going to do any good. You can't beat something with nothing. What I feel is much more important is when Christian parents know what is true and able to teach their kids, not just biblically, but from a scientific modeling perspective of this actually makes a lot of sense. Meaning, so why the heck do we have all these sedimentary layers around the world? And why are they so thick? Because you can pass by road cuts all the time and see them. They're all around us. Why are they like that? And why are there fossils? And so I think it requires parents and pastors to dig deeper. And actually, a book that I recommend everybody should read is a book by Paul Garner called The New Creationism. And it's a great starting point. It's it's not a huge book, but Paul overviews this because I think that within the creation world, there's been a lot of tendency toward anti-evolution, which is understandable. But I think that understanding the positive case for creation, that will therefore, in a sense, you don't need a filter because in a way, you can hear it, but you have something that fits things well, meaning it fits not only the text, but it fits the world around us. And I think it's important for parents to recognize that science is not the ultimate authority. Our society wants to teach them that. So by just simply teaching kids a little of the history of science, it's amazing how that goes to say, well, these views have changed over time. Why are they not going to continue to change? That when we say the Bible is an ultimate authority because it's history, we can't change our parents. We can't change our grandparents. There are things that we can't change that George Washington lived. No one can do anything to
Just
that.
is.
It is. It's 100%. You can take it to the bank. And if someone were, you get into Vegas and say, I'm going to bet you that George Washington didn't live, I mean, they're going to be all over that bet. So my point is that when we look at this as the Bible is a book of history, and that science is just simply a humanly attempt to understand the very complex way God made the world, well, when you see that, kids begin to say, oh, well then, so this isn't, I can see, the world works, but science is trying to understand it. So technology is not science. Technology is an application. It's engineering, which is why engineers never have to worry about a job security, but a biologist would. Christian biologists, creationists aren't allowed in these job situations because they won't be hired, because they're teaching a paradigm that's very dangerous to the prevailing worldview of which trillions and trillions of dollars rest. Think about it. If these guys are right, it means that every major college, every university, every textbook, most movies, most TV shows are wrong. Well, that's a lot of money riding on that. And so there's a lot of things at stake with this view. So to me, the way that parents need to address is they've got to teach their kids the positive case. So, okay, how did animals diversify? Why do we have all these animals? When you start talking about created kinds, it actually makes a lot more sense. And you can go into any, I was in Vienna at their Natural History Museum, and sure enough, all the animals are put in their kinds. Very curious why the bears go with the bears, and the cats go with the cats, and the dogs go with the dogs, and they don't become the other, and you don't see it in the fossil record. And when you start studying that there really isn't very clear evidence. There's a lot of change, so you got to embrace change, but you don't have to embrace common descent. When you start teaching what's in the fossil record and start digging in, and that's what I did. I read the evolutionist books. I love actually a lot of evolutionists. Stephen Jay Gould, what a great writer. Benton's book, Vertebrate Paleontology. Go teach yourself from the evolutionist, in many cases looking at the data and say, I think that data may fit better this model. And I think that's important to realize. There's a lot of motivation among people not to get into this data. Don't let the Christians really get the data. Because when kids start to see stuff and say, well, that actually makes a lot of sense, and it fits the Bible better, well, then you don't really have to worry as much about the filter, because, again, not to go on with my daughter, she's having to do something on the Big Bang. And my daughter had never really been exposed to Big Bang Theory. So I just gave her some YouTube videos and a Khan Academy thing to listen to. And she came to me and said, so you're telling me they believe that in the first second this happened, in the first 10 seconds, and then nothing happened? She kind of explained to me, and she was like, this is crazy. Who would believe this? She goes, how do they know this is true? Now, again, a lot of even secular guys are questioning the Big Bang. And we bring it up in the film. Plasma theory guys are solid. Any number of views that say the Big Bang's a non-falsifiable theory. But you got to have one. So they're going to hold on to it tooth and nail. Even though all these, you listen to Danny Faulkner, all these things have changed about it. So I have an old encyclopedia set, and I gave it to her in 1971. Fascinating. The Big Bang theory, really, I think Penrose and Hawking had only really established it in 1970, so this was still very new. And a lot of the later views of the age of the universe, they changed the Hubble constant, I believe, in the 80s, because it had gone up to an 18 to 20 million, or 16 to 18 billion year old universe, and now it's dropped back down. Well, in 1971, if you read this Britannica entry, they had said, well, there had been a problem in understanding how old the universe was, because we had established that the Earth was around 5 billion years old, 4.5, I think. Claire Patterson, I think, had done that in 53. But they said, we now have figured out that the universe is 5 billion years old, which makes perfect sense with the age of the Earth. And they had a whole section basically saying that, isn't that consistent? We know the universe is 5 billion years old because the Earth is 5 billion. It all just fits. And it was like, now that's great, because they're seeing a pattern that now everybody would say, oh, no, we don't believe that at all. Well, so how do you know what's true? The encyclopedia says it then, and you go to the next version, it'll change it, and you go to see the point?
Right.
Where is it going to be in 25 years? So when you start showing kids that these things have changed, then it's not true. But as my daughter pointed out to me, she goes, well, it's funny, the Bible's never changed. And its view of the earth goes way back. Even Augustine, who did not believe in six-day creation because he believed in instantaneous creation. A lot of people point to Augustine because he was a Neoplatonist, influenced by his culture to basically think that God made it in 6 days for the angels to see. We would say, what are you talking about? But the point is, the culture can even influence good Christians, which I would say is why a lot of smart, wise Christian men today have accepted the conventional view of either they've been taken in by theistic evolution or by a view of an old earth creation because of the culture. if Augustine can be influenced by that way, then I can promise you guys that we respect a lot today can also be influenced and still be wrong.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to try and wrap up a little bit. I really want to applaud you for the work that you're doing in educating Christians about their faith and sort of tearing down the walls between science and the Bible. And I think that there's a oversimplification that's occurring in our culture where if you're a Christian, you have to sort of commit intellectual suicide when you go to college or when you go to the higher educations. And so we really want to promote and support people who are giving rational worldviews that also support and are consistent with the biblical narrative. And so we want to endorse this. We want to definitely encourage our listeners to check out this video. It's available online. Tell us where people can get your movie.
Yeah, so they can go to isgenesishistory.com. Has got all of our materials on it. And it's also going to, other than get into the film, we've got a lot of other resources. So we try to provide a lot of more ways because we realize this is complex. And as you even see, I have a tendency to go off in all these various directions. I think that at the end of the day, it's important to realize that parents are going to have to do some work on this one, and kids are going to do some work that sending them off to college and just saying, well, they've read a few things or seen a film, it ain't going to cut it. I mean, this is the basis of the non-Christian worldview. And so it will be highly protected. And so children need to understand not only the creationist view, but they need to understand the evolutionist view pretty well. You got to know both sides, much as you would anyway with apologetics. You need to know both sides. Right. But I think that our hope is to provide parents more and more things. We have church resources, we have parent resources. In a way, it's kind of what the film's about. It's like getting people to start the journey. It's not an end. Right. It's really the beginning.
It's a great beginning, and it's a great on-ramp into thinking and talking with your kids about things that are true.
Yeah, and I think, again, parents are going to readily identify how important this is. Their kids this year are coming home with science projects, with papers, with textbooks that directly contradict what those kids are hearing in Sunday school. And so to be able to have a resource where they can sit down with their kids and say, look, there are two views of the same event. And it's important for you to decide as a young adult what you're going to believe, because what you believe about this is going to shape your identity. It's going to shape your future. And as Christians, I really strongly support any effort that we make to give our kids the ability to weigh out the options, to not guilt them into their faith, to not intimidate them into believing in Christ, but to allow them to process that on their own and then embrace it for a lifetime. And so we thank you for being here.
It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Right. Robert, I feel like I just got through science class.
Yep. I don't know what to say. It's just, I found myself like, I know we're going down bunny trails, but I like these bunny trails, and they all actually lead to kind of the same understanding. But my goodness, there's just so much. Once you start peeling back the layers of this, it makes sense, and it's just amazing that for some reason we as Christians we don't spend time. I think did you say this on the air, or was it just off? Like, if you don't show what a real dollar bill is, you won't know what a counterfeit is. So I like that idea of exploring. Okay, this is real creation. This is the reality. This could have happened this way. That way, you can sense when it's not true or real.
For me, it's really helpful to show that there is inconsistencies in our culture's insistence that the Bible is a myth. Yeah. So science, educators, pop culture, movies, entertainment, everyone has created this sort of message that to believe in Scripture, to be a Christian today, is to really abandon your logic or reason. And it's just sort of this knee-jerk emotional thing, and that you're not really a serious thinker if you believe in the Bible. And I love the fact that a very serious thinker just spent 30-some minutes with us blowing our mind about all the detail all
Well,
the facts that
some of them
support it. Yeah.
Yes, they are all those evidence support, but it just still opens up layer after layer after layer of, like, I just kept wanting to go deeper and deeper. And if this was this, which we know to be true, then that must mean this, which means the. I mean, there's just not enough time in the day to actually explore everything. But yes, all the truth that he laid out for us was just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it wasn't like generalities.
No.
These weren't like lofty statements.
No, this thought that I never thought of, but like, how did these layers of coal get, created? And then talking about the log runs, so the log layer, where, like, if a big flood happened, it would push.
Makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
I never heard that put that way. So,
well, and then we said this in the post interview with him before he left. The opening of this film is Mount St. Helens, and you don't know that until 5-6 minutes into the show.
They reveal,
and you're looking at this landscape that looks ancient, and then the sort of the curveball is, well, this has been 20 years.
Right.
This was formed in 20 years.
Right.
And you go, oh my gosh, how many other assumptions has science made or educators made that are false?
Right.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful resource. I had that feeling we could have talked all day with Thomas.
Absolutely.
And he knows his stuff.
He does. What's the website? We want to make sure we get our listeners to go to it.
He's with Compass Cinema. They're based
but
out
all the
in-
resources that you can get for this video. I'm trying to remember. I thought he said something. Is genesishistory.com? Yeah, is genesishistory.com. There's lots of resources that dig deeper into the film, but certainly start with the film.
And there's quite a bit of detail about who the experts are on this. I didn't see any names on the film roster or on the website that weren't PhDs.
Oh, yeah.
Like the entire crew. There's like dozens and dozens of PhDs. This is a very, very high level documentation of the truth. And it supports the biblical narrative of a young earth.
Yeah.
Which is a debate. Even
Totally.
within Christians, and I'm not even sure where I stand on the young earth model, but I definitely can see that there is biblical evidence to support what we as Christians believe, that God could have created the earth in 6 days. That's not intellectual suicide to believe that.
Right. And most importantly, that God created things.
Yeah.
This didn't just happen.
Right. Yeah, the intelligent design thing is a sort of an issue you and I had to wrestle with a year and a half ago when we were writing the Shock and Awe curriculum and kind of coming up with that whole live event. And we realized very quickly that the probability of a universe spontaneously coming into order was a leap of faith.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So I think for parents, they may assume that their kids know this already. They've been to church, they've been to church camp, they have had experiences with pastors where they've professed their faith. But I think the detail is important, especially when they get into junior high.
Yeah. I think the thing that we need to make sure parents know, and I know we're running out of time here, but is that this is complex and it is a lot to take in. So don't try to cover it all. Take a little bit at a time. Take one step at a time, one lesson at a time, and start. It's not just, okay, kids, we're going to sit around the table and now we're going to dispel evolution. Like, just build blocks of understanding, because it is overwhelming when you see how many layers this is, whether it's creation, whether it's, coal or, species or whatever. There's all kinds of avenues you can go down. Just don't feel overwhelmed. Just take one thing at a time.
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about at the end of our interview is this idea that help parents form filters, help them build critical thinking in their kids. And I think this is a huge stepping stone for a tween or teen who's beginning to wonder, hey, is this all true? And here's a great project. Here's a great product that parents and pastors could use to begin that journey with their kid.
I completely agree. That's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in. This is a really new format for us on season 2 of Brilliantly Brave Parenting, and we hope you like it. We look forward to hearing from you. You can email us at info@ishinelive.com. And you can also go to our iTunes account or SoundCloud and put in a favorable review. Those are very important to us. Give us some kudos if this is a blessing to you, and share it with a friend. Also, season 2 has a brand new component.
Which sure does.
Yeah, we have a mascot this year.
A sage.
A sage mascot, yes. He's a small Yoda-like creature.
Yes, he is a Yoda-like creature.
His name is Winston.
His name is Winston LaCroix Beeson. He has a middle name. Did you know that?
I did not know Winston had a middle name.
Winston LaCroix Beeson, yeah.
A big name for a little dog.
That's right. So Winston LaCroix Beeson is our sage, and every week we're going to be bringing you wisdom from him. And,
wisdom.
This week he gave it to you. What was it about?
Well, Winston, I am a dog whisperer.
I know.
Yeah. And so Winston, he weighs maybe 4 or 5 pounds?
About 5.5. Yeah.
5.5 pounds. He's a Yorkie Chihuahua. Yeah, Chorky. He's very sweet, and he likes to whisper to me, especially when I'm holding cheese. And so today, Winston whispered to me a fun fact that will astound and amaze you. Did you know that the Oreo cookie, yes, the Oreo.
I'm familiar.
It was made and invented in 1912. Did you know that?
No.
Did you know that the Oreo cookie has been the best-selling cookie of all time since?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned that he knows this because he's not allowed to have them. It has chocolate in it.
Well, I don't know exactly what's in it, but I do know that
I can tell you the center is lard and sugar.
Well, that kind of ruins it for me just a little bit.
Winston brought it up. That's probably what he likes. He likes the lard and sugar.
Well, I like lard and sugar then, because Oreos are like my favorite.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting fact. I'm glad he shared it with
Winston, he each week is going to bring us a very, very important fact like that. And so for those of you Oreo lovers, don't listen to Robert. Lard and sugar is good for you. So enjoy your Oreos in peace, and know that it's over 100 years old, so it's traditional.
And the best-selling cookie of all time.
And it's popular. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Thanks, Winston. And join us again next week for Rosalinda Riviera. She's the director of New Life for Youth, an inner-city ministry. She works with families that are working through rehabilitation and life issues. She's got on-the-street insight and wisdom. She is an influential voice on the East Coast, and we hope you enjoy next week's podcast on Brilliantly Brave Parenting.
Parents, remember, even if you may not feel brilliant or brave, you are. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, and love, and self-control. And I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed. I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. 2 Timothy 1:7-13. This podcast is a service of iShine Ministries and the Tween Gospel Alliance. All rights reserved. Donations to Brilliantly Brave are tax deductible at ishinelive.com. Review and subscribe to this podcast on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, or on our webpage. And read our blog and connect with us at wordpress@brilliantlybrave.com. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Brilliantly Brave.
iShine is a faith-based ministry and media company that looks and feels a lot like a Christian version of Disney. iShine is more than entertainment. We're the producer of the largest Christian tween TV series in the world, a nationally syndicated radio show, a Nashville-based record label, host to multiple live tours and summer festivals, an interactive website and social media, and a provider of printed and digital devotionals, preteen Bibles, and church curriculums. But more than anything, we're a trusted Christian resource for parents and pastors. You can turn to us for all things tween. Check us out at ishinelive.com.